When we think of brutal winter battles in WWII, one clash always stands out: the Battle of the Bulge. It wasn't just a fight between armies. It was a desperate gamble by Hitler and a test of endurance for the Allies. At the heart of this frozen battlefield were two forces: Hitler U.S. Elite 1st SS Panzer Division and George Patton S. 3rd Army. The 1st SS, hardened veterans, carried the weight of Germany's last hope in the West. Patton's troops, meanwhile, were fast, aggressive, and unrelenting, trained to fight in any condition. What happened when these two collided in the snow-covered Ardennes became one of the deadliest winter clashes of the entire war. The story isn't just about tanks and artillery. It's about grit, mistakes, and the will to survive. In the forests and villages buried in snow, both sides discovered just how far they could be pushed. Some soldiers described it as hell on ice, where even the weather felt like an enemy. This is the tale of how the 1st SS and Patton A.S. 3rd Army met in the Ardennes, and why that moment defined the final act of WWII in Europe. By late 1944, Germany was cornered. The Allies had stormed ashore in Normandy, liberated Paris, and were pushing toward the Rhine. Hitler knew time was running out, but he believed one last bold offensive could break the Allied front. His plan was daring: punch through the Ardennes, drive to Antwerp, and split the British and Americans apart. If it worked, the Allies would be thrown into chaos, maybe even forced to negotiate. For the spearhead of this offensive, Hitler turned to his most fanatical and experienced troops, the 1st SS Panzer Division, also known as the Leibstandarte. These men were veterans of countless battles on both the eastern and western fronts. They carried both fear and reputation. On the other side, the Americans believed the Ardennes sector was quiet. Troops here were mostly resting, not expecting a full-scale assault. That false sense of security played right into German hands. On December 16, 1944, the German offensive began. Under the cover of thick fog and snow, artillery opened fire, shaking the forest and villages awake. Then came the panzers, rolling through the snow, their black crosses almost hidden in the blizzard. The 1st SS pushed forward relentlessly, crushing American outposts and scattering units caught off guard. Small towns became battlegrounds. Bridges were seized, roads clogged with retreating U.S. soldiers. The German advance was so fast that many Americans called it a ghost army, appearing out of nowhere. But the Allies weren't broken yet. Reinforcements began moving. Orders were given to hold key towns at all costs. Patton, commanding the U.S. 3rd Army to the south, realized he had a chance to strike back. He was famous for moving fast, but now he faced his toughest challenge: turning his entire army north in the dead of winter. It was a maneuver few believed possible, but if anyone could pull it off, it was Patton. As the 1st SS Panzer pushed deeper, Patton's men prepared to meet them head-on. The Ardennes was about to witness a clash that would decide the fate of Hitler A.S.'s last gamble in the West. The 1st SS Panzer Division was the tip of the spear. Their mission: break through quickly, seize key roads, and drive west toward the Meuse River. They had the best equipment Germany could muster: Tiger tanks, Panthers, and hardened infantry. At first, their momentum was unstoppable. Small American units were overwhelmed, forced to retreat or surrender. Villages fell one by one. Bridges were captured intact, opening paths for the panzers to roll forward. But their advance wasn't without darkness. The 1st SS carried a brutal reputation, and stories of atrocities followed in their wake. One infamous incident at Malmedy shocked the world: American prisoners massacred in cold blood. Word of that massacre spread quickly, fueling American anger and determination to resist. Meanwhile, the icy weather slowed the German tanks. Snow and narrow roads turned their columns into easy targets. American engineers blew bridges and blocked crossroads, forcing the panzers into deadly delays. The 1st SS began to run into pockets of fierce resistance, especially in towns where U.S. troops decided to hold at all costs. Every hour lost mattered. Their fuel supplies were limited, and the clock was ticking. The Germans pushed hard, but they were no longer advancing freely. American artillery dug into ridges and hidden forests rained fire on the advancing panzers. Even so, the 1st SS pressed on, determined to break through before the Allies could regroup. But that regrouping was already happening. Patton, informed of the situation, began executing his famous winter maneuver, turning his Third Army north in just days. It was one of the fastest large-scale army movements in history, especially in snow and ice. While the 1st SS clawed its way westward, Patton's divisions were racing to meet them. The clash was inevitable. Both sides knew it. It was just a matter of when and where. And soon enough, the frozen villages and fields of the Ardennes would erupt as Patton's men slammed into Hitler's elite. George S. Patton was known for speed and aggression. When news of the German breakthrough reached him, he didn't hesitate. In less than 72 hours, he pivoted his entire Third Army north, a feat many thought impossible in snow and ice. Roads were jammed with tanks, trucks, and artillery, but Patton's men kept moving day and night. Soldiers later said it felt like they were racing against time itself, knowing the fate of the Ardennes depended on them. By December 22nd, his units were already approaching the besieged town of Bastogne. Bastogne had become a symbol of defiance, with the 101st Airborne holding out against relentless German attacks. Patton knew if Bastogne fell, the 1st SS would have a direct path west. He couldn't let that happen. In freezing blizzards, his tanks pushed forward, often fighting both the enemy and the weather. Engines froze, men marched through snow up to their knees, but the advance never stopped. Morale was high, fueled by Patton's own fiery speeches. He reminded his men they were about to make history. At the same time, American air power began to return as the skies cleared, hammering German supply lines. The combination of Patton's speed and Allied airstrikes started to choke the German offensive. The 1st SS, once racing ahead, now found itself slowed, under attack from multiple sides. Patton's tanks clashed with German spearheads in icy fields, where snow turned red with battle. The Ardennes had become a frozen cauldron, with both armies locked in brutal winter combat. For Patton's men, the fight wasn't just about stopping the Germans. It was about proving the U.S. Army could adapt and strike back under impossible conditions. They pushed into villages, clearing house by house, often meeting ambushes from determined SS units. Every mile gained came at a cost, but the Americans kept pushing relentlessly. By Christmas, the tide had shifted. The 1st SS no longer looked like an unstoppable spearhead. They looked like an army trapped in snow. And the real clash between Patton's Third Army and Hitler's elite was about to explode across the Ardennes. By late December, the frozen villages of the Ardennes became the stage for one of WWII's most brutal confrontations. Patton's Third Army slammed into the 1st SS Panzer Division, and suddenly, Hitler's spearhead wasn't advancing. It was fighting for survival. The weather cleared just enough for Allied planes to strike, pounding German convoys trapped on icy roads. American artillery thundered from the hills, shredding supply lines and hammering SS positions. In towns like Foy, Houffalize, and Bastogne's outskirts, street fighting raged as tanks dueled point-blank in narrow streets. The 1st SS fought with ferocity, their Tiger tanks knocking out Shermans with ease. But Patton's men kept coming, overwhelming with numbers, speed, and sheer stubbornness. For many soldiers, it wasn't about tactics anymore. It was survival in the snow. German fuel shortages became crippling. Panthers and Tigers sat abandoned, out of gas, easy prey for advancing GIs. American infantry stormed frozen forests, flushing out SS machine gun nests one by one. Patton's armor pushed through icy roads, sometimes dragging stalled vehicles with chains just to keep momentum. The fighting was savage. Both sides lost heavily, but the Germans couldn't keep pace with Patton's relentless push. By New Year's, the 1st SS was bleeding strength. Their dream of breaking through to Antwerp was gone. Instead, they were locked in retreat, harassed from the air, and hunted on the ground. One American officer later said, "It wasn't just a victory, it was revenge for Malmedy." The SS reputation for brutality only fueled Allied determination to crush them completely. Burning tanks, shattered villages, and snow-stained red marked the end of Hitler's last gamble. Patton's Third Army had done the impossible, turned the tide of the Bulge and shattered the 1st SS in winter combat. The clash proved that discipline and fanaticism couldn't overcome logistics, air power, and relentless counterattack. And with the 1st SS retreating, the Battle of the Bulge entered its final decisive phase. When the smoke cleared in January 1945, the German offensive in the Ardennes had failed. The 1st SS, once feared, was broken and retreating. Patton's Third Army had not only relieved Bastogne, but also smashed the German spearhead, proving American mobility could win even in brutal winter. The price was staggering. The U.S. suffered tens of thousands of casualties, and German losses were just as devastating. For Hitler, the failure of the Bulge meant the end of any hope of turning the war in the West. The 1st SS never regained its former strength. Its reputation lingered, but its fighting power was shattered. Patton's legend, however, grew. His rapid maneuver north remains one of the most remarkable feats of the war. The Battle of the Bulge became the last major German offensive on the Western Front. From then on, it was only retreat. For the soldiers who fought, the Ardennes was remembered not just as a battle, but as survival against cold, hunger, and relentless enemy fire. History would remember this clash as the moment when Hitler's elite met their match in Patton's relentless Third Army. And that is why the Battle of the Bulge, frozen, bloody, and unyielding, remains WWII's deadliest winter clash.